Hey, John, can I ask how you ended up here? I'd love to hear it.
John Walker Lindh stands accused of trying to kill his own countrymen.
He's a traitor.
He admits training in al-Qaeda
He
camps.
began his journey to Islam after seeing the movie Malcolm X.
What could be more American than that? It was just watching a Spike Lee movie.
After 9/11, the American government went to Afghanistan to question prisoners.
And it was discovered that one of the prisoners was an American named John Walker Lindh. But then a few Taliban soldiers staged an uprising.
You will never make me believe that John Walker Lindh didn't know what was going to happen that day.
There's a white, middle-class American from Marin County, California. The American Taliban.
A media frenzy ensued.
He was our first terrorism prosecution after 9/11. And that looks like this.
He was kept in custody 54 days without a lawyer.
They didn't let him go in front of a jury.
This is not just about John Walker Lindh
It comes down to the idea of treason.
and keeping the country safe.
They have brought up the cannon to shoot the mouse.
Why is treason worse than any other crime?
That is a trailer from the Showtime documentary Detainee 001, and this is Factual America. We're brought to you by Alamo Pictures, an Austin and London-based production company making documentaries about America for international audiences. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood, and if you don't know the drill already, each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. This week we're in for a real treat as we welcome acclaimed Emmy-winning director Greg Barker to discuss one of his latest films, Detainee 001. The film documents the unlikeliest of stories. A young man from the San Francisco suburbs journeys to the Middle East and soon finds himself as the face of Islamist extremism in post-9/11 America. Yes, we are talking about John Walker Lindh. Greg, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Things are good. Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. As we've already noted, the film is Detainee 001, released in September on Showtime, and I gather it's also on various streaming services and digital platforms. So congratulations on that. And
thank you.
I know you've been busy on other projects as well, which we can talk about. But let's first focus on Detainee 001. What we usually ask our guests is usually the first question is maybe you can tell us what Detainee 001 is about. Give us a little bit of a synopsis for our audience.
I thought you just did it, actually. I thought, actually, as you said, this kid becomes the face of radical Islam. I thought, yeah, that's pretty. We should have used that as our blurb. So,
is that your tagline?
So you just explained it. But it was that, I've been for a while. I've been trying to make sense of how the post 9/11 world has changed us. And I look for individual stories to unpack, moments in time. I'm particularly interested in origin stories of this, the way things unfolded in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, with those first 6 months to a year, which I think really kind of set the stage for a lot that has followed. This story, John Walker Lindh, it was in my mind for years. This kid from Marin County, California, who as a teenager goes on a spiritual quest to find Islam and ends up fighting with the Taliban, joining them before 9/11, but he meets Osama bin Laden, and then he's captured on the battlefield. At the same time that Osama bin Laden is escaping through Tora Bora, if you remember that.
Yeah.
Suddenly this guy is found, and he becomes the face of the enemy. And the film is really about our reaction to him. He himself is kind of a mystery, and frankly, about as interesting as most guys are at 18 or 19. He's not actually that interesting. Thinks he is, but really isn't. But it's the reaction that we have to him is really what the film unpacks through this extraordinary footage that we came across. It's really an experiential film that lives in the moment, that takes us back to a time that seems a long, long time ago, but at a moment when a lot of our current world was kind of formed. It's like an origin story, and it's also just a phenomenal yarn. So, yeah, that's what it is.
Indeed. I mean, I remember when it happened. Some of the articles that you do, you put up on the screen. I remember reading certainly that New York Times expose on him, and my wife and I still remember some of the quotes from some of these articles that it lived really large then, and then it just, at least for me living here over in the UK, it kind of has gone quiet, and then it's interesting. I mean, I think as you say in your film, it's it's a well documented story. It played out in front of us on international media, but this is interesting what you're trying to bring to the big screen that maybe we haven't seen already, reminding us how this all happened and how visceral some of the reactions were.
Yeah, and I think when you look at John's case, you can trace back like the distortions of the justice system to this case. The vilification of the enemy, anybody who's different, to this case.
Yeah.
It really was a turning point, a pivot in time, and that's what we decided to kind of just dive in. And so through this one particular story, you learn a lot about who we have become since, and the consequences of all those decisions made way back when that we're still living with.
Yeah, I mean, what have we maybe explain to our audience who are maybe not familiar, haven't seen the film yet? I mean, what have we gotten wrong about this story? I mean, many of us would have had our impressions of him and would have been shaped by the media coverage at the time. I mean, one thing that struck me was the 8 out of 10 charges being dropped. I was not aware of that. I mean, I mentioned that I was going to be interviewing you, and people who know the story say, "Well, isn't he still in prison? Isn't he locked away forever?" What did we get wrong, you think, in terms of the general coverage of this?
Well, what we got wrong is kind of like fixating on this one guy as the face of the enemy. That's what, this guy came from the Justice Department, the White House, and particularly the media. I mean, the media was hungry for something, for a story. The war in Afghanistan, the first wave of the war, was kind of petering out. And suddenly this guy it became this huge news story. And I knew intellectually it was because I kind of remembered, like you, but when you actually go back and look at the articles and the news reports, it was everywhere. Of course, so much has happened since, particularly the invasion of Iraq and all that.
Right.
Kind of makes this fade into memory, but it was the biggest story at the time. And it really, look, I mean, if you think of Guantanamo, the decision to kind of not prosecute these cases within the general U.S., the justice system, this all goes back to this moment, the abuse at the hands of American soldiers that he was subjected to, foreshadows Abu Ghraib, and
exactly.
It all began then. And the reason that they never really, there was a last minute plea bargain, which gave it kind of an unsatisfactory ending, which is one reason I think it kind of just faded away. It didn't have an ending. He was never convicted. Neither side, the U.S. government or his lawyers, wanted to go to trial in the end, because the U.S. government didn't want the abuse and the kind of miscarriage of justice that that happened to him exposed. His lawyers also did not want a trial with this kid who was, public enemy number one to happen. It was literally, the trial was going to be a mile or two from the Pentagon, beginning on the first anniversary of 9/11. And they're like, how do you get a jury that's going to really be sympathetic to this kid? So in the end, they just pled out, and it disappeared. So we never really knew what happened. And so there was never this kind of, closure that we look for, an end of the story. And I think it was just one reason it just kind of like drifted away. And he went to prison for 17 years and is now out. He was released about 2 years ago.
But as you say, it's this whole, using 9/11 and the events afterwards for, lack of due process, justification.
Yeah.
I mean, we actually, officially the U.S. government came up with legal reasons for justifying torture and these sort of things. Yeah.
And look at how Muslims are still treated in the general media and the public perception. I mean, it's very difficult to be a Muslim American or in Britain in the last 2 decades. The vilification, of course, began sort of shortly after 9/11, but really was personified in this country, the U.S., by this one case. Where there was no room for nuance. And I'm not saying John Walker Lindh was a perfect guy, and I'm not using anything, but suddenly this kid who was one of our own, how could he be a Muslim and how could he want to go on some jihad quest? And it vilified that whole community. And I mean, Muslim Americans wanted nothing to do with this guy. He was kind of a hapless 18, 19-year-old, but he became this kind of, this face of all that was wrong with Islam. And I think we still are living with those consequences, not just his case, but the broad strokes. Look at how the FBI has, put almost a quarter of its or a half of its entire budget on counterterrorism within this country, focusing on plots that largely don't exist, are made up, that the FBI investigates, and all to stop the next John Walker Lindh. And it really kind of set in motion the whole chain of events that I think history will not look kindly upon at all. So that's why I wanted to make the movie, and plus, as I said before, the footage and everything was just incredible. So it was, as for a filmmaker, it was a dream.
Well, yeah, I want to talk about that footage more in a minute. But is related to that footage actually is, I mean, much of the focus, which I found very interesting, is not what I was necessarily expecting, but it was a sort of a revelation, was this focus on the immediate events leading to his capture and immediately after that, the Battle of Kali Jangi and Mazar-i Sharif. I mean, that's is this because you're getting to this origin story? Is this why you focus as much attention as you did on that part of the story?
Well, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening are filmmakers, and you make the film, particularly in documentaries, with the material you can get. So the reason that's the focus is it was great material, but it's what we had. And once we found that, oh my gosh, we have all this amazing footage we can access, and that the film just wanted to be that. It just wanted. It's like, this is so incredible. It seems like it's from a different era. Why not just ground the film in this incredible medieval, battle, and just let it live there. If we didn't have the footage, it would have been a totally different kind of film.
Well, since we're on the topic, I mean, how did you get access to? I mean, this footage is incredible. You've got footage of CIA operatives actually questioning John Walker Lindh. This footage from the French and German journalists, the CNN filmmakers. Apologies, I forget his name right now. But
Robert Pelton.
Yeah, I mean, but you've got.
It
it's
began
amazing.
with the Pelton footage. So Robert Pelton was this guy who was known as. He wrote a book called The World's Most Dangerous Places. He wasn't really a journalist. He was like an adventurer, But he'd go everywhere, and he'd spend a lot of time with jihadis and special officers. He's there, in northern Afghanistan. So I'd done another film where I licensed some of his footage.
Right.
And Pelton I'd gone to see him, and he had a garage full of old tapes.
Yeah.
I don't know, you just take this stuff and something's in there. And we digitized a whole bunch of it. And so we finished that other film, and I don't know, I was sitting with an assistant editor, I can't remember exactly, and going through some of this material, and then saw this long interview that Pelton had done with John Walker Lindh, which interestingly had never really been seen because the footage itself was subject to a legal battle between the Justice Department and CNN, where at the time of Lynn's court case, the Justice Department wanted to use it as evidence, and CNN was like, you can't. He was just a freelancer, but they took over and said, You can't. We're not going to give you all the rushes, and it became this whole thing. So all that was ever seen was like 2 or 3 minutes of a package story, and the rest went into some archives at the federal courthouse. It turns out I had all that footage just through Pelton's data dump, and we had it. And I was like, oh, that's incredible. I've never seen that before. And that was the basis that's how the film was commissioned. And then from that, it was just like, the kind of normal process of like, who else was there? Let's find this other footage. We tracked, some of it was in Lebanon, some of it was in Germany. People handed us rushes. They probably shouldn't have handed us, but we just kind of like figured it all out. And it's like a little detective. I mean, that's fun, but it took us 4.5 years to make the film, and probably 2.5 years to gather all the material. So that's
amazing. I mean, including that footage that Pelton says that was offered to him originally and he didn't take it. But is it?
It was like there's this key moment when CIA officers at this prison where a lot of Taliban and Al Qaeda prisoners are being held, interrogate several of them, including John Walker Lindh.
Right. Yeah.
It's a decisive moment in his story, and one of the CIA officers is then killed later that day in an uprising. And there was a camera, probably some kind of Northern Alliance intelligence guy was filming a lot of it. A lot of that footage has disappeared, but some of it we have snippets of it, and we were able to piece together from a lot of different sources enough to kind of create a moment there. So it was detective work.
But it's amazing because it's like it's like a war movie. It's like I mean you do see it all play out. I mean it's as much as I think you could. It's amazing what was captured about. I'd heard of the battle years ago, but not to be able to see it as it did. It's
it's interesting in terms of making filmmaking. Is I've done several of these films where we get amazing footage. I don't have dedicated film archivists do this work, because it's almost they're very helpful if you want to find one specific thing in an archive in New Zealand or something like that.
Right.
But I have my researchers, my people who speak the language, who know the story, look for the footage. And it usually unpacks and material that dedicated archivists are not able to find. So that's how I approach it. I have the APs and the field producers do all the footage work.
Oh, it's, I mean, in that regards, I found it, I mean, I know this is a film about John Walker Lindh, about post 9/11 America, the immediacy immediately after that. But in some ways, it also becomes as much about sort of, there's element of it about war photographers and correspondents. It's quite incredible what they put themselves through. I think we sometimes get the talking heads who play it safe in Kabul or wherever they are, but these guys are right there embedded right on the front lines as much as anyone. And quite incredible.
So there's Pelton there, and he's doing his thing, and he's kind of an independent operative.
Yeah.
And there were a handful of journalists who came into northern Afghanistan as the Taliban were falling. And they came in from, I guess, Uzbekistan. They ended up at this medieval fortress called Kala-i-Jangi outside of Mazar-i-Sharif in northern Afghanistan. They were all stringers. These were not like the top guys are flying into Kabul and doing their stand-ups and wherever. These are like just guys. I think they were mostly guys up there, and they stumble on this battle, and it was interesting talking to them. There's like four guys in particular who were the main sort of outside journalists there. French guy, German guy, British guy, one American guy. All freelancers. It was a defining moment in all of their lives. They all thought they were going to die. They all either got totally hooked on the adrenaline of war reporting, or had a moment where they thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to get killed. But you could have actually made a film just about these four guys. And they stayed in touch over the years because, they were the only ones there until like within a few days, Dan Rather shows up and all that. At the beginning, it's just these, it's like, what the fuck's going on? And they're the ones with all this amazing footage and these experiences. And Yeah, and they, it's interesting what's happened to them since. It's like some of them, a couple of them totally left journalism. Some of them are kind of damaged, and I don't want to speak for themselves, but it was but it was a defining moment in all of their lives. So totally, you could create a moment around that. And it's going to sound a little weird, but it's not. I did a bit of like combat stuff in my earlier days. It's not so different from what drove John Walker Lindh to want to be there as well. There was an ideology perhaps to him that's not there in the journalists, but this quest for adventure that you can have when you're very young and kind of stupid and thinking this is going to be, kind of fun, which it is in a way, is a similarity between a young jihadist and a young reporter who wants to go up, and that drives a lot of this, of not just the coverage of war, but war itself.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, it's, as you say, some of the sentiments they have are very raw. Even just talking about the energy. Talking about energy because there's, bodies littered all over the place. I mean, I know they're not being inconsiderate. It's just that I can only imagine what it must be like in those situations. And yeah, it is kind of a young man's game. I did have, maybe inspired by Dan Rather, I used to think I wanted to go into hurricane places and help people in the middle of a hurricane. But I think my mom's happy I never did do that. But and then also I think and then you do get the I think you've some interesting and very great access to other unsympathetic sources, if you want to look at it that way, to John Walker Lindh. I mean, we've got the daughter of Johnny Michael Spann, who's the first American combatant to be killed in the War on Terror. We've got the CIA operatives and their own blunt assessments. So, how keen were they to be part of this story and share their? I mean, it must be difficult, especially for the daughter.
Yeah, she was. Yeah, I think she was a little reluctant, but she ultimately wanted to tell her story. This was the weird film to make in that a lot of almost all of the key decision makers at the time, John's lawyers, the government, soldiers, U.S. soldiers, and the government officials who oversaw the case, didn't want to be a part of it. In fact, didn't want the film to be made, wanted us to go away because none of them come out looking good, frankly. But some people wanted to talk. And Alison Spann was, I think that just the time was right for her. She's become a journalist partly because of the way her father's story was sensationalized, her father's death when she was 9 or 10 years old.
Yeah.
She wanted to go into journalism to tell more empathetic stories. Interesting woman. And, a handful of people wanted to talk. But what's interesting is like the key, usually you can crack kind of a wall. In this film, most people, I think we just don't know fully why he was pled out, because nobody, including John and his family and the lawyers, really want the truth to come out. And I think that it was a wall that we just hit. So I had to find another way of making the film and find people who were relevant, who would talk. But the normal people you would make if I was making an investigative film, which I tried in the course of doing this, would just, didn't want to talk.
So, I mean, when you hit a wall like that, but you knew you had enough of a film that was, you just make a different film than maybe you started off with.
We hoped rather than knew. In the end, yes, we did. But it's hope.
I think documentary filmmakers are some of the most hopeful people I've ever met. Yeah. So, hey, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with Greg Barker, the director of Detainee 001.
You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America.
Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with award-winning director Greg Barker, the director of Detainee 001, released in September 2021 on Showtime and on streaming services and digital platforms globally, I believe. Actually, this is interesting. I come to my notes and I said, my first question after the break is interesting origin story, which you did say at the very beginning. This is an origin story. But what I find was this whole this Malcolm X connection, and what I mean, you don't don't dwell on it too much, as you say. He's John Walker Lindh is a 19-year-old boy. Is not all, or young man is not all that interesting, but it is kind of an interesting how what sort of at least somehow sparked his journey.
Yeah, I think. Well, yeah. So that connection was made in the film by John Ray, who's a novelist who wrote a book called Godsend that's inspired by John Walker Lindh's journey.
Yeah.
Very different, but it's inspired by John's journey. So because I was like racking my brain trying to think. I don't understand what compelled John to go on this journey. It's not like his parents understand. I don't get it. And so I read Godsend. And I thought, that's. I talked to John Ray, the writer, and just like, how did he make sense of this? And he'd done a lot of research, and there's what we know is that he said he watched Malcolm X, the Spike Lee movie as a kid, and was kind of inspired by that. We also know there's other weird things. This is like when he's 14 or 15, but he was like blogging as a
rapper, right?
As an African-American rapper. And, it's just kind of clearly a kid in search of an identity. So so lots of teenagers go through that. They don't all end up meeting Osama bin Laden. So, what then takes somebody from a mixed up teenager looking for a purpose to then into the battlefield in Afghanistan? It's kind of, I think it's impossible to know without going to some deep psychoanalysis of John. I doubt he may not even know himself, So I didn't want to speculate about all of that.
Yeah, and I guess it's you were talking about hitting walls. I mean, do we know where John Walker Lindh is now? Did you? Yeah,
he's released. Sorry. Did I what?
Oh no, go ahead. I mean, do we know where is now? And did you try to reach out to him, or was that even a consideration?
Well, we don't know exactly where he is. He's probably in Northern Virginia because he's still under some kind of court supervision for a period of years after his release. And that supervision is within the jurisdiction of the court where he was tried, the federal court of Northern Virginia. He's probably there. We tried to. I was in touch with his lawyers and his family several times. Met his father, met the lawyers, talked to his mom on several times, and it looked, and through them was in contact with John in prison. The unit that he was held in federal prison prevents any outsiders from contacting him. Right. So it was all indirect. We thought he was going to talk for a time. We thought the family would cooperate. In the end, I think for the reasons I've said before, they decided it wasn't in their interest. Yeah. And I get it. I think, we don't know what John really thinks now, and they didn't want to make things worse for him. So, and I think they're also worried about somebody coming after him, some crazy person, if they knew what he looked like, which is not, I get that too. But we tried, and I wish he'd have talked, but he didn't. But in the end, I also concluded he gave one interview to Robert Pelton right after he was captured. It's a great interview. It's the core of the film, and it's also immediate. So if you want to understand what somebody felt back then 20 years ago, that's a more accurate source than somebody who's 20 years later, we all remember things and twist our narrative to benefit ourselves. I'd rather know what he said at the time. So that is the kind of becomes the spine of the film, and I think gives more insight than anything else is going to give.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, it's all uncensored. He's not expecting to be interviewed, and Pelton even talks about letting the cameras roll, even after. And
it's like when I did this doc called "The Final Year" about the Obama White House.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but I had this. Yeah, it's like, and I'd known people going into that who'd been in government and then left. And they always talk different when they're in government. So I made a decision just very early on. We were going to stop filming the day that these guys left office. So I didn't want the spin. It's like, and I want to because everyone sort of spins their past. It's like, let's capture somebody in the moment. And that informed me, my thinking about John. It's like, I would love to see what it looks like now. But I don't want to hear what he thought about back then, because he's just going to twist it, because we all do that. So I'd rather have the immediate moment.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting point, and I think quite a insightful one. I mean, looking at this film in a different way. I mean, timing is obviously impeccable. Obviously you had an idea about the 20th anniversary. That's always been out there, but and we had the hit John Walker Lindh's released a few years ago. But as you kind of alluded to, is a story that had been, I guess, an idea had been running around in your head for a little while, but you could have done various different subjects looking at 20 years on, and I know you have looked at other elements to this, but I think you've kind of alluded to it already, but what really drew you to this story now? Now is the time to tell it, or was it, as you say, it was part of because you got this access to the
now is almost, the 4.5 years ago when we decided to start making it, maybe more than that. So it's kind of like, it wasn't like, oh, let's get this thing for the 20th anniversary. And it was just like, here's a story that we wanted to, I wanted to tell, and the exec at Showtime who commissioned it, Vinny Malhotra, also was particularly interested in the story, and we'd worked together before, so we're just like, okay, maybe let's look at this. So the timing, was really just, this is when we finished the film, and we decided, okay, let's release it around the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Of course, we had no idea that in Afghanistan would implode, and that John Walker Lindh ended up fighting for the winning side in the end. The Taliban are still in control. So
I know. I mean, did you have any clue? I mean, because you're going to be modest about this, but you've done a lot of films related to this region and to this topic, looking at the 20-year war on terror. Right? Did you have any clue no, you didn't have a clue maybe that the U.S. would be withdrawing in August of 2021, but could you see this day coming? This is where
Afghanistan.
Yeah,
I mean, without you could. Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think I've been there like 4 times, not in a while, but I remember being there in 2007, and everyone was talking about the Taliban coming back. Everyone, and it was held off for a while, but you could see that it was for lots of reasons. The U.S. mission was misguided. The government was corrupt. The population in the rural areas was tired of war. Lots of other things. You could kind of see that it was that this was the end game, and I think a lot of U.S. officials, military, intelligence, all political, could all see this day coming too, and they just didn't really want to admit it. So, there's lots to unpack there, but I hope there should be a room to really kind of figure out what went wrong and the mistakes that were made, the mistaken priorities, I think is the way I would describe it. Because the origin of what happened, what went wrong, you can trace again, not through the John Walker Lindh film, but like through the early ways that the military operated in Afghanistan. You can see the stage being set for how this would all play out. And
do you see this as the end of the war on terror? Is it so nice that you get these little bookends? You've got 9/11, Afghanistan invasion, and then now the withdrawal. And is that an end, or do you see we're still living with these legacies today and will continue to do so?
I think we're still. I mean, the war on terror was like this completely absurd term. What does that mean?
Well, exactly.
There was, but I think, I mean, it is a convenient way of framing this era. I think there will be other terrorist attacks. They will be shocking, but I think it's who knows? I don't want to predict the future, but definitely it's an era that is receding into the background.
And are you putting it off to the side now in terms of what you're working on? I mean, you've done a few films.
Yes. This specific thing, the kind of the trajectory of 9/11 and how it's affected us. yeah, I mean, I'm still interested in geopolitics and all that, but I think I've hopefully done with that. With this particular story.
Well, yeah, yeah, indeed. I mean, going back to some of your other work. I mean, you've already mentioned the last year. Obviously, you had Manhunt about finding finding Bin Laden. I mean, how do you gain? I mean, you can even focus on any of your films, but like, how do you gain such access to high-profile subjects? That must be. I mean, that's. To get the, I mean, I just find it amazing. You get the national security advisors to say, in the Obama White House to say, yeah, come on in, film us for a year. How does that happen?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think, I don't know. I mean, I've always felt interested and comfortable in that world and fascinated by it. And intrigued by how power changes and affects people. And I guess, when I was just starting out after college, I worked in DC for C-SPAN for Brian Lamb.
Okay,
and
really?
and did a lot of interviews. I've set up a lot of his interviews and met a lot of people, senators, all sorts of people in DC. And there was so it kind of demystified that world for me. And Brian taught me to ask very simple questions and to not not be kind of thrown by positions of power. And so I kind of saw a little bit of it up close, and then I don't know. And I over time, I mean, I knew some people who ended up going into government and saw their kind of transition and was intrigued by it all. I don't know. It just was something I was drawn to. And when I started doing documentaries, I found that it was a subject I was comfortable with. And also I was able to kind of talk to people in those positions and get them to hopefully open up. And without kind of being a part of it. I don't consider myself a part of the national security operation or the establishment at all. But I kind of empathize with people in those jobs. And I always ask myself, like, what would I have done if I was in those moments? I had a really interesting experience. I did a project for Frontline about the genocide in Rwanda, which began as just like a trip I took to Rwanda with a friend of mine from the region. And then, but I ended up sort of through that sort of meeting a lot of people who were in key decision-making positions in Washington and the UN, like Secretary of State and National Security Advisor and all that, and who did nothing, who kind of totally failed and were haunted by their decisions during the genocide. And I realized, talking to them, I thought, I can understand all of their chain of thought, like why they decided it was in America's interest to do nothing while 1 million people are killed in 3 months. Right. And that was kind of horrifying to me. It's like, I had this moment where I thought I'm interested in that process that allows, decent, rational people to make horrendous choices. And then they're haunted by them in a way that really kind of, they can't ever let it go in their mind. And I just thought there's human stories in that I wanted to keep unpacking. And that's kind of like informed how I approach a lot of these. Like, how do you talk to somebody who was behind the torture program, the CIA? They're living with that all the time. Some of them think they were right, some of them think they were wrong, they're haunted by it, but it's front and center in their own psyche. And I find that interesting.
But I mean,
much more interesting than just kind of like attacking it from the outside. I'd rather understand it from the inside out.
Well, exactly. And you get in on the inside, and it would be very easy for these people to say no, wouldn't it? I mean, they could just say, why let a film crew come in? I mean, that's in an uncontrolled environment in a way, because, if it's your typical CNN or Fox or News or whoever it is that comes in to do an interview, that's kind of set, the parameters and where it's going to go. But to be basically the fly on the wall, sort of behind, behind the scenes sort of crew. I mean, it would be. I'm almost kind of asking from a personal standpoint, because I have some, I'm aware of a project where I too have been surprised by some politicians saying yes to people following around with a camera, and it's I do wonder if is it because people in these positions are thinking already about their legacy or their justifications or what it is that why they would say.
Well, it can be.
Yeah.
I mean, also people want to tell their stories. It can be
Yeah.
about legacy, but I think so if all they care about is legacy, then and that's all that's coming across in the footage,
It's not going to be interesting.
It won't work.
Yeah,
it's not interesting. So
yeah.
they have to then break through, and that's the job of the filmmaker in the moment. Is just like to get past that. And in the case of the final year, I mean, there was direct conversations where I had with people at the White House. Is like, this is not good enough. Like, we're just getting. It just sounds like you're spinning, or you're like, and we need. It's not real enough. And and enough of them were smart enough to think, oh yeah. But I know other people trying to film inside this administration who are hitting all sorts of brick walls. And so it's you have to find just both the right approach and also the willingness of people in those positions to take a bit of a risk. And often those people are incredibly risk averse, with the way bureaucracies work. Yeah. So it doesn't always work out, but it's often just luck.
I mean, and when were you in DC?
When I was there I went to college at George Washington. I lived in DC up until the early 90s.
Okay. Yeah. I was there through early 90s to the late 90s. So
okay.
And I was back there a few weeks ago, which in many ways it hasn't changed.
No, DC does not change, which is why I left.
Yeah, I think it's which brings us back. I mean, the thing that struck me was that because you've got the scene in the film where John Ray says, I know what it's like to want to escape from your hometown.
Yeah.
And he was born in Washington, D.C. And, and I mean, I know we say suburbs of San Francisco, but John Walker Lindh keeps saying he's from Northwest D.C. when he gets interviewed. Where are you from? It's I thought it was very interesting. These two different individuals,
yes,
both trying to escape Washington D.C.
Yes,
like my wife did as well. So. I'm also aware that, we've got a little bit more time. I'm aware you have a Chelsea kickoff that you want to catch against Malmo. But what's next for you? I think has this White Coat Rebels has also come out. Has that already been released, or is that?
It's not been released yet. They're doing a deal at the moment, so it'll come out sometime later this year or next year.
Okay.
I'm focusing mostly on narrative at the moment. I did a feature for Netflix, and that's what I'm really doing. I did that, and then I had 3 documentaries that I had committed to before I did that. So when Detainee was one of them, the White Coat Rebels. So I love docs, but I feel like the documentary. I think docs have become much more commercialized, which is great. There's a lot of work, but I think the subject matters that people are willing to tackle, at least broadcasters, most broadcasters, the streamers are willing to tackle, are becoming less adventurous. So, I'm also just interested in getting to authentic emotions. And I think for me at the moment, at this point in my career, I'm more interested in unpacking those through narrative, through fiction, but drawn from real life. So that's what I'm doing now.
I think that's very interesting. I mean, without burning any bridges, is it? I mean, in terms of the broadcasters, people are commissioning things. You think, in what ways are they? I mean, are they just really much more commercially focused? So do they do their focus groups and know what subjects they think will and won't work, and so that determines what they do and don't commission? Is that kind of what we're getting to?
In broad strokes, probably yes.
Yeah.
I think. I think people talk about a golden age of documentaries. I think we just lived through it. I think I think there's a lot of work, and you can get $20 million for a Billie Eilish documentary, which is great. But I'm not interested in making that movie. That's not why I got into documentaries. And so but that is what if if you're looking for eyeballs, looking for the big payout, looking for something that will appeal to the broader academy and get you an award, those are the kind, this is a mindset that's driving a lot of this stuff. This is what gets made. And I think if you look at what, like, say, Sheila Nevins did at HBO, HBO was in a particular moment where that company has changed now, and for lots of economic reasons. But there was a moment where, and what Netflix was doing early on, what CNN Films, a lot of the stuff was actually, really sort of transformative and saved this, art form that had been kind of, not really having much impact, and suddenly giving it, a whole new lease on life. And there's an audience for it. But I think it's shifting now. So it's kind of, I would consider myself, I'm not sure if any of the films I made in the last 12, 13 years would be commissioned today.
It's interesting.
So, yeah. I mean, we were in a moment in time where, because of the aftermath of 9/11, there was a hunger for this stuff. So, that's part of it. But I think now things have just shifted. And it's much more commercial and market driven, and which is, it is what it is. I'm not complaining, but it is the reality. But I'm just personally interested in at the same time looking at these kinds of stories from a different perspective. And I'm sort of tired of people hiding their emotions, and I'd rather you can control them more in fiction. So I think it's just more satisfying for me at this moment in time.
It's amazing how that's so we can put you, Greg Barker, on the record that the golden age of documentaries has come to an end.
I would say that, yes. Not that anybody cares what I would say, but yes, I think it's over.
and I have to say, as a podcast, the aforementioned Billie Eilish documentary, we have featured that. We did interview.
Which RJ did a great job.
He did an amazing.
My daughter, it's amazing.
He did an amazing job, and it's our most popular episode ever. And we've benefited from it. But yes, I know where you're coming from. I mean, I find this interesting because I think what you've said probably, I don't know how many years ago, but not all that long ago, people would have said to get all those that authenticity you're talking about, you needed to go to docs to get it. But now it's completely flipped in terms of the way you're seeing things. That to still capture that authenticity and emotions that many of us look for in film, it's now got to be, it's back to narrative. At least
for me, at least. I mean, unless you have amazing, so like obviously, take Billie Eilish. So they're filming all that stuff. I mean, the movie, what he got with her contemporary stuff was really fantastic. He was totally inside her world and had trust. Yeah. But all of that was made possible, I think, because of the footage that they had already shot. So, somebody on her team went to somebody and said, we have all this great footage and we want to package it to a documentary. Yeah. That's how that thing would happen. So there's with all respect to everybody involved, there's a commercial imperative in the interest of the artist to tell that story. Yeah. And, that is not the kind of, there was no imperative from John Walker Lindh to get this thing out there. So it's a different approach. But I think it's also it's very commercial and it's all great. I'm not disparaging that. And
I understand.
I'm glad, but it's shifted and what people want to make and what people want to see, which is things go in waves. And you have to just recognize that the wave that one certain wave crested and we're in a different wave now.
Okay. All right. Well, we are starting to come up to the end of our time. The most biting question of the session, of the episode, why Chelsea? Why'd you have to pick Chelsea as your team?
I'll tell you why, because my doc producing partner, John Batsek, is a lifelong Chelsea fan. Yes, but my son, so I lived in London for years, 18 years, and I really didn't pay any attention to football. Went to a couple matches, but didn't really care. But when we moved to the States, my son was 4, born in London, and he started getting interested in soccer, and he wanted to figure out what team to support. And he looked at a map of where he was born, which was St. Thomas's Hospital. Right. And you're not going to like this because you're at Crystal Palace, but he looked at a map and he's like, what's closest? And he measured to the stadiums. And Crystal Palace was a little bit closer, but he's like, I don't want to be a Crystal Palace fan. So then he looked, the next one was Chelsea. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to be a Chelsea fan. And that's what happened. So now I'm, as people know me will say, I'm pretty obsessed by it. And, you know, it's fun. So it's the only sport that I follow. Living back in the States now, I don't really follow U.S. sports, but I do follow Premier League football pretty closely.
Well, I think it's a great season, and Chelsea's got a great team. I'll begrudgingly admit. No, I'm glad for my third son that we didn't go that route, because he was born in Watford, and the hospital's literally bang right next door to Vicarage Road Stadium. You know.
Yeah.
But then we moved to South London. It was the same thing. I've got this American dad, as you know, in England. Your allegiances are passed down through the generations usually. Yeah. And who do we support? And for whatever reason, I had taken a disliking to Chelsea. So I said, well, you know what? The closest team at that point, they weren't even in the Premier League yet. So I took them to a riveting Chelsea, Crystal Palace Blackpool match in the Championship.
Oh, okay.
And my son's been hooked ever since, and I feel bad for him too, because it's gonna be lifelong, a life full of misery. But Greg, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. Now I know you need to go take a little bit of a break, sit down. I don't know where you're based. Maybe it's a little too early to open up a can.
LA.
It's
LA. It's 11:55. So
yeah,
a little bit too early.
Yeah,
I'll make another coffee.
Maybe at halftime. But enjoy the match. It's been a pleasure having you on. Just to remind our listeners, it's Greg Barker, the director of Detainee 001. If you haven't seen it yet, it's been released on Showtime. That was in September, and you can find it on various digital platforms. So, Greg, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure having you on, and hopefully we can have you on again, even though you're only doing narratives now.
Thank you, Matthew. Really enjoyed it.
All right. We'll let you sign off. I've got some other stuff to go through, but you don't need to be around for that. So thanks again.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
care.
you. It was fun.
See you.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Enjoyed it. Thank you. So once again, a big thank you to Greg Barker for coming on to Factual America for this podcast episode. Before saying thanks to others, I just want to alert you to an exciting new collaboration we will be announcing in the coming weeks with a leading film magazine, so please watch this space for more details on that. Do want to give a shout out to Sam and Joe at Inner Sound Audio in Eskrick, England, which is just outside of York. A big thanks, as always, to Nevena Paunovic, our podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting such great guests like Greg onto the show. Finally, a big thanks to our listeners. As always, we love to hear from you, so please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. And please remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off.
You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.